We have a full afternoon in store for us, including a reception later on and bus travel, so we're going to try to keep more or less to the schedule which has been set out in the book. I want to welcome all of you to the afternoon session entitled Social Benefits of Innovation. Those of us who work in the fields of innovation get some extra inspiration from the fact that the work we're doing not only contributes to the profit of our companies and the general field of knowledge, but there is a belief that, by the belief we have that innovation is a force for social good. This afternoon we have assembled a group of speakers to address that subject, the social benefits of innovation. The first speaker will be Dr. John B. Slaughter, Chancellor of the University of Maryland at College Park. Dr. Slaughter previously served as the Director of the National Science Foundation. He received his PhD in engineering physics from the University of California in San Diego. He has had long experience in academic affairs and is very well qualified to talk about the human resource aspects of innovation. He is a fellow of the IEEE and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Dr. Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swerin. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to speak to this group concerning some aspects of our nation's efforts in terms of examining where we are in technology policy. My thought this afternoon is to talk specifically about one aspect of human resources for innovation as it applies to technology. In particular, I want to talk a little bit about engineering manpower and focusing on a couple of topics about which I feel some comfort in speaking. I'm reminded a little bit of the story of Billy Grimm, who was having one of his revivals in a Midwestern city. He arrived there late the night before his revival was to begin the next day, and when he awakened in the morning, he realized he had some letters to mail, and he prepared the letters and decided to find a post office where he could mail them. And he walked out on the street, not knowing where he was. He asked a young man who was working on the street, could he tell him where the post office was? The young man said, "Certainly, it's not hard to find. Go down here 2 blocks, turn right, go a block, and then you'll see a fork, turn left, and you'll be right at the post office." So Reverend Grimm said thank you, and he proceeded to follow the young man's instructions. And 10 minutes later, he ended up right back where he started, still in front of the young man. He said, "Young man, I'm sorry, I tried to follow your instructions to get to the post office, but obviously I made a wrong turn. Can you repeat them?" And the young man did, and as Reverend Grimm started off, he stopped and he came back and he said, "Let me introduce myself to you, young man. I'm Reverend Billy Grimm. Tonight I will be having a revival program. I'd be very happy if you came down to hear me preach." And the young man said, "No, sir, I don't think I will. Anyone who can't find the post office can't tell me how to get to heaven." So I'm going to try to avoid topics about which I have no experience or knowledge, and talk particularly about a couple of concerns that I would hope you share relative to our development of manpower for innovation. I can think of no subject which is of any more importance to our nation today and of greater concern to me. Certainly none of us can doubt the important role that innovation plays in the economic growth in our country. It's also true that technological innovation depends upon an educational system that is capable of producing an adequate supply of persons trained to be our scientists and our engineers, and that provides equal access to these professions for all members of our society, regardless of race, sex, or ethnic origin. Today, I want to focus on 2 major and related issues that fall under the rubric of our concerns for engineering manpower, or person power. One is the current national crisis in pre-college mathematics and science education, And the second is the need that we have to encourage women and minorities to enter the engineering profession. The 1983 National Science Board report showed a steady growth in the rate of the employment of engineers of over 4% annually every year since 1976. This compares very favorably with an overall U.S. employment growth rate of 1.1% in 1980 to 81 and 2.8% for professional and related workers during that period. We also have to keep in mind that the growth rate for engineering was inhibited by some supply constraints in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Among the various engineering fields, electrical engineering had the biggest growth rate from 1976 to 1981, 7.5%. Also, a recent NSF report showed that the electrical equipment industry had an 11% jump in the hiring of professional research and development personnel in 1979, and similar figures after then. That is a reflection, I believe, of the strong demand for engineers by high technology firms in this particular industry. Employment in science and engineering jobs reached 2.8 million in 1981, and almost half of the human resources devoted to science and technology were in the field of engineering. We know that areas of science, technology, and engineering are currently experiencing, in some cases, very severe personnel shortages, and that most of them are going to experience fairly healthy growth rates in the coming decades. A few years ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics forecasted that occupations in science and engineering would grow by 40% between 1979 and 1990. The growth they expected to create some 250,000 new engineering jobs, as well as 100,000 new jobs in the mathematical, physical, life, and social sciences, and as many as 450,000 new jobs in the computer professions. The number of bachelor's degrees that have been awarded in engineering increased by a dramatic 64% between 1976 and 1981, exceeding 65,000 per year. Although there is still a major shortage of computer scientists nationally, we're reaching a point now where there is a balance in the supply and demand for most of the engineering fields. Nevertheless, we continue to be driven by the belief that prospects for employment in engineering remain excellent, and there are still, in many fields, some fairly well-documented shortages. I think that universities have a tremendous responsibility right now in terms of the job that they play in educating future engineers. Universities are constrained in many cases by sometimes severe faculty shortages. We find that doctoral faculty and even graduate students are being drawn off by high salaries that they can receive in industry and discouraged by increasing teaching loads and outdated laboratory equipment and instrumentation. Major research universities are actively attempting to obtain funding from private sources and public sources other than their state governments, and trying to identify partnerships with industry to help address and resolve these kinds of problems. But universities don't have the sole responsibility for maintaining a skilled labor force. Given the current and the future job markets for engineers, every one of us has to be concerned about what our school systems are doing, our public school systems, prior to the time a student enters the university age, what those schools are doing to prepare students to enter scientific fields. Recent reports on the crises that exist in American education, including the report of the National Science Board's Commission on Pre-College Education in Mathematics, Science, and Technology, which I had the pleasure to be a participant in, and at least two members in the audience, George Burnett and Bob Larson, participated in along with me, indicate that students in our country don't know enough science or enough mathematics for the times in which we live. And the reason is, at least one reason is, that not enough science and not enough mathematics is being provided to them in the early days of their public school education, at any level of the system, from elementary to high school. Only 1/3 of the nation's 17,000 school districts require graduates to take more than 1 year of mathematics or 1 year of science. Only about 1/6 of all secondary school students currently take junior and senior year courses in either science or mathematics. Few students who are not intent on technical careers pursue science beyond 10th grade biology or mathematics beyond 10th grade geometry. Thus, in effect, at age 16 or even earlier, in many cases, students deny themselves the opportunity to enter the rigorous college-level courses in science and engineering even before their careers begin. An educational system, I contend, with these kinds of limitations can hardly be the foundation for the broad inquiry necessary to develop young minds. We have to put a great deal more emphasis on mathematics and science at all levels of our educational system. The National Science Board Commission report recommends specifically that elementary schools provide a minimum of 60 minutes per day of mathematics and 30 minutes per day of science in grades K through 6, and that all secondary school students be required to take at least 3 years of mathematics and of science and technology, including a year of algebra and 1 semester of computer science. In order for us to meet these kinds of needs, however, we have to solve some other problems. Our teachers are inadequately prepared. They're in short supply in crucial disciplines. Our classrooms are too crowded. Our textbooks are out of date, and our teaching methods are failing. Nationwide, the vacancy rate for mathematics teachers in the secondary schools sometimes reaches 50%. In almost all cases, it's 10 to 15% or higher. Situation in the physical sciences is equally bad. When a school district the size of Chicago can afford only 1 high school physics teacher for every 2 high schools, imagine what the situation is in smaller and less prosperous school districts. As Chancellor of the University of Maryland at College Park, I find that one of my major responsibilities is to work with educators at all levels in the state of Maryland and elsewhere to develop better research, better teaching techniques, and more fiscal resources for improving our educational system. At Maryland, we are attempting to follow through on the recommendation of the National Science Board report, which states unequivocally that our nation's higher education institutions have a significant responsibility for training our nation's youth in science and math education. The report calls for higher education institutions to increase their standards of admission, to make certain that the curriculum has a higher degree of rigor, the curriculum that future teachers receive, that it includes a greater emphasis on disciplinary subjects. It calls for more rigorous but fewer teacher education and methodology courses. And it calls for institutions to go out and attempt to recruit the more talented students into the teaching profession. Suppose we do these things. There are still some other steps that we have to take. As we improve scientific education at all levels of our schools, we also have to recognize the important responsibility we have to ensure equal access to that education. There is a great deal that can be said to support the assertion that the technological capability of the United States can be strengthened by greater participation of all segments of the population of this country in the science, engineering, and technological fields. There's no question but what our society needs progress, and the chances for progress, creativity, and productivity can be heightened by the inputs of persons with a broad background of interests, experiences, and concerns. Despite national needs, current participation rates of minorities and women continue to be low in science and engineering, although admittedly there has been a great deal of progress. Let's look first at the situation with respect to women, both with respect to their share of the workforce in engineering and their proportion of the engineering degrees being awarded. Then we will do the same thing for minorities. The number of women engineers tripled between 1976 and 1981, reaching almost 35,000 in this country. But despite this rapid increase, only about 2% of all employed engineers in our country were women. By contrast, in 1981, women represented about 43% of all employed persons and 45% of all professional and technical workers. In 1980, women earned only 10% of the Bachelor of Science degrees in engineering, despite the fact that they represent approximately 50% of the high school graduates. At the University of Maryland at College Park, women enrolled in our undergraduate engineering programs have increased from 6.7% of the total in 1976 to 16% of the total in 1983. In 1983, they represented 14.5% of our engineering graduates. Now, certainly there has been some progress, but I think none of us can afford to sit on our thumbs and say that we have achieved anywhere near the level of participation and the level of their activity for women in the field of engineering. I forget the numbers, but I saw, I think only yesterday, the fact that women engineers throughout the country continue to suffer fairly large disparity in terms of their salaries. There's a great deal yet that needs to be done to rid, in our profession, the ugly elements of sexism, because it still does exist. If we turn to the situation of minorities and look specifically at what has happened to Black Americans in terms of their involvement in engineering, we also see some progress, but we also see that we still have a long way to go. Between 1976 and 1981, the number of Black engineers increased from 10,800 to 20,600. Yet Blacks still represent only about 1% of all employed engineers. By contrast, in 1981, Blacks represented 7% of all professional and related workers. Blacks enrolled in engineering training increased by more than 100% between 1972 and 1980, largely because of a major effort undertaken by the National Research Council, supported by a number of industrial organizations in the country, an effort which was designed to bring Black participation in engineering to parity with respect to their levels in the population. But that increased from 1% to 2% of the engineering degrees granted in 1980 falls well short of that goal. Again, at my campus, University of Maryland at College Park, where we have made a major effort recently to recruit and to retain minority students in science and engineering, the number of Blacks majoring in engineering doubled between 1976 and 1983. Yet, in 1983, Black students made up only 5% of the total majors in the College of Engineering and only 3.4% of our graduates. So we have a long way to go. Women and minorities, in my opinion, have to be specifically targeted when we work to improve math and science education of our nation's youngsters. Talented women and minorities should be identified, recruited, and encouraged to attend the universities best equipped to train them in science and engineering. The nation must improve its support for science and engineering education at the predominantly Black colleges and universities. Finally, educators and scientists must encourage women and Black students to pursue careers in engineering. I feel that all of us have a major responsibility, both individually and through our professional organizations, to reach out to these young people, to assist them, to help their teachers, to encourage them to do more, to pursue these fields that heretofore have not had very much in the way of participation. We have to stress that technical careers are rewarding, socially productive, and within their grasp. I have been concerned about some aspects of this for some time. It is interesting to note that IEEE 8 or 9 years ago took a leadership role in terms of trying to improve the quality of the participation of minorities in engineering. I was pleased to see Dick Emberson here because it reminded me of the efforts that we pursued with the Educational Activities Board of the IEEE to begin to posture this organization somewhat more aggressively behind a movement to improve that participation. The engineering profession, by and large, has been recalcitrant and reluctant to move in this direction. IEEE's history is not necessarily one that we can be exceedingly proud of. I think what has happened in the past several years has been a very positive indication of the commitment of this organization, and I encourage it to continue. But there is a great deal more that needs to be done. We need to recognize very clearly that engineering is not a field that can be performed by only a small segment or a particular segment of our society. In particular, engineering is not the preserve of the white male. It is an area in which there can be and should be and must be participation by all segments of our society. In closing, I would like to leave you a thought which is derived from an old Chinese proverb. A proverb states that if your plan is for a year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. But if your plan is for a lifetime, educate men. And I would add, women. We're making progress in educating an adequate supply of engineers to fill the needs of our nation's workforce, but we have to be thinking about a lifetime plan to ensure the vitality and the preservation of this country and to build on the marvelous diversity which is inherent in our population. I think we have to do everything within our power to capitalize on our own educational experiences and to open doors to the next generation of engineers. It is my fondest belief that the responsibility lies clearly upon our own shoulders. Our profession has to be the profession that takes the lead in this regard. Our country's improvement of its productivity and its innovation and its economic capability in the world's marketplace will only come about if we realize that we cannot afford to do anything less. Let me leave you with these words, which I believe very sincerely. Creativity knows no color line. Ability is not an inherent function of one's ethnic background. Intelligence, intuition, and insight are not determined by one's race or sex. Thank you very much.
We have some time for some questions. It's kind of hard to see behind these lights, but I'll do my best.
Yes.
Yesterday, maybe it was a press briefing by Rainbow, referred to a problem which he described as the fact that there seems to be training physicists and scientists in form of engineers. Eric Block this morning described the need for integrating in the engineering education not only engineering design, but product design, and manufacturing know-how. Can you give any examples of how universities are beginning to react to this need of broadening skills?
Well, I think I can give you some examples of what's happening in the colleges and universities relative to the kind of training that students are receiving in engineering. There certainly has been, I think, a shift from, say, the time when most of us in this room received our engineering training to what has occurred over, say, the last 15 years or so, where there has been a decided shift in the direction of a great deal more coverage of things which may seem more science related than they are engineering related. I don't think that's been bad. I think that there clearly was a need for strengthening that aspect of our engineering education. Problem is that engineering education is constrained in terms of time. We still think that people ought to be able to receive a4 degree in not more than 5 years. And trying to cover all the things that one might want to put in a curriculum during that 4 to 4.5 to 5 year period is a very difficult task. Schools are moving, though, in the direction of much more in the way of what one would refer to as design. There's a recognition of the absence of design courses and the need for design courses, because I think most engineering deans, if you talk to them, are embarrassed and saddened by the fact that students are graduating without an appreciation or a capacity for doing design. We find a number of industrial organizations, I think IBM perhaps is the most visible, who are providing support to universities to begin to put a larger design component and particularly as it relates to productivity in manufacturing. Universities always tend to lag somewhat in their response to these issues, but I think that you're beginning to see a much greater move in that direction than, say, existed 5 years ago.
Yes.
If you want to have more women entering the engineering profession, the people to go after are the parents. Because I have made it a point of meeting with quite a few women student members of the IEEE, and they were asking me questions about myself. And they were so happy. They said they could go home and tell their parents that they met a successful woman engineer who yet had a husband and 3 children, because the parents were so worried about the girls going into school and never getting married.
Very good. I wish that we could clone you and make you available to more people. Your point is a very good one, and I agree.
Yeah.
A number of the students I see coming in now are not finishing a bachelor's program in 4 years. It's becoming, at least among a minority of them, a 5-year program, sometimes a 6-year program. Sometimes that's financially motivated, and many are in work-study programs. I wonder whether you could comment on 2 things. Do you see value from the university standpoint to the bachelor's program becoming a 5-year or more program to add more content? And secondly, do you see value to a work-study type arrangement for the typical student of engineering?
I think, as you correctly put it, perhaps not a preponderance, but a significant number of students are spending 5 years in finishing their engineering degree. It took me 5 years, but that's because I was slow inherently. But I think that there is value in 5 years for the simple reason that very much of what an engineer should have exposure to cannot really be crammed into a 4-year curriculum. So although I'm not specifically responsible for the curriculum of our College of Engineering, I certainly would vote in favor of consideration of the longer period of time. Work-study kinds of activities turn out to be an economic necessity, as you pointed out, for many students. And working at all makes it difficult to carry the load level required to complete an engineering career in 4 years. Again, I think an appropriately designed work-study program can prove to be very beneficial, particularly in terms of providing the students with some online interface with what engineering is all about during the time that he or she is receiving an education. So I would be inclined to lean in both of the directions you pointed out, although I'm sure that there are arguable reasons why some people feel that that's not the right direction.
One more question. Yes.
John, the problem of attrition for engineering students is maybe particularly severe for minority students. Would you comment on the social impact of students who are not well prepared in high school, be they black or white, the conditions of our high school leads to this point? Compare those students who actually go into engineering and are frustrated and drop out, compared to those who don't go in at all.
Well, there are a lot of reasons for that, Steve. That's a very, very valid point. I keep referring to the experience at the University of Texas, which I think is one that we all ought to think about when we consider the problem of retention. University of Texas, and I may not have the numbers exactly right, and this was true about 4 years ago. University of Texas found out that 70% of their white engineering students completed a degree in engineering, and they found out that 70% of their black engineering students completed a degree in engineering. And when they traced back to examine this and to determine why the situation they were experiencing there was different than almost anybody else was reporting, it had to do with a number of factors, including, one, being concerned about what sort of preparation the students had when they came to the University of Texas, being concerned about the kind of support structures that were available to assist the students while they were there, and not using simple admissibility requirements like SAT scores and so forth to make that determination. One of the major problems facing minority students and women students is the fact that they have, unlike many students, have not had the opportunity to be exposed to role models. one of my favorite quotes, which is true, is to say that I was the first black engineer I ever met. And it's true because there was just no such thing in the environment as a black engineer. So that absence of role models still exists when you consider the comparative numbers. And I think that when people are identified at a very early age, are given an opportunity to be exposed to fields like engineering and science, such as is occurring with some very excellent programs that the various engineering organizations are supporting, and in fact IEEE has supported, provides high school students in their sophomore and junior years a chance to spend some time with exposure to engineering. I think we'll find the disparities in retention beginning to narrow.
Thank you very much. Our next talk is entitled Regional Development of Technological Industry for Full Employment by Ray Stata. Ray Stata is chairman of the board and president of Analog Devices, a Massachusetts company. Mr. Stata is very active in high technology activities in his state. He was the founder of the Massachusetts High Technology Council. He received his BSEE and MSEE degrees from MIT and serves now on the Institute's visiting committee in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. Mr. Stata.
Thank you. It's fashionable during an election year to turn to Washington for the solutions of our economic problems and for our competitive problems, and I think we've heard that here in the last few days. And indeed, as Congressman Chow emphasized this morning and as others have noted, Washington does have a very vital role to play. And I think we're all in agreement as to where those areas are, and they include assuring a stable investment environment and the competitive cost of capital, in providing incentives to invest in modern equipment and technology, in supporting basic research in our major universities, and in making sure we have an open and fair trade policy.